If I can start with you, Colin, if you can introduce yourself and your work with social enterprises.
Of course, good morning. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if this is on. Yeah, it's on. You can hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, good. Good morning, good to see you. My name is Leyoh. I'm from the Social Value Portal. So we help some of you, including non-eaten signs, to measure their social value, whether that's throughout the procurement process or whether that's through corporate activity.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Pilgrim. I'm one of the co-founders of Supply Change. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces in the room after seeing you all on Zoom for so long. Supply Change connects social enterprise suppliers with organisations across the public and private sector who are looking for goods and services. And we do that through a number of services that we offer, like our platform of social enterprises that many of you are on, our Meet the Buyer events, and our supplier research and analysis services. And we're also a social enterprise ourselves, so I'm sitting here both as an intermediary and a social entrepreneur who faces many of the challenges that you all do as well. So nice to be here.
I hope you know who I am. I'm Peter Holbrook. I've taken my jacket off, so you might think I'm someone else. I run Social Enterprise UK. I've been there 12 years. Before that, I used to run a social enterprise called Sunlight Development Trust. And one of the things we do at Social Enterprise UK is work on kind of national policy and local policy and try and get supporters, both in the private sector, but also within government and the public sector, to support policies that will help social enterprises to grow and to thrive. One of the things that we do is the Buy Social Corporate Challenge. Many of our partners on the sign there. We have 30 big commercial, multinational businesses, and we introduce social enterprises to them through their supply chain. And last week, someone's really celebrating my victory of achieving £250 million worth of spend between large businesses and small social enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, if I could just start with a nice easy one to get us warmed up. Just from your perspective, why is it important that social enterprises thrive and prosper? I said it was an easy one, didn't I?
Well, am I happy to start? Yeah. Okay, all right. So clearly the 70% of staff at non-eaten signs with some type of disability would otherwise hopefully be doing something else, but they might not be. And so through the work that is awarded to non-eaten signs, yes, we get good quality product, but there's also a significant impact to the local community, to those people finding meaningful good work, and to the value to the buyer. So it's not just that financial return, we've got the social return. And so for me, I think if you can make better business decisions, we're going to spend money on signs anyway. We're going to spend money on goods and services anyway. Why not make a choice to not compromise quality at, I'm sure, a competitive price, but actually have a much further impact and a much further reach. So it just makes good business sense. There are really very few compromises to be made when you choose to make that decision. So I don't really see why there would be an issue, apart from some issues around potentially scale, which I know affects some of us. And I think that's something to think about when we talk about how we help SEs to prosper and to thrive. But if you can make the right decision, there's some good options available. These businesses aren't hidden away now. It's pretty easy to find most organisations to do what you need. It makes business sense.
No, I know we've got some procurement people that we're going to talk to a little bit later on. I know one of the barriers sometimes that I hear about engaging with social enterprises is we need somebody to supply us on a national basis and they're local. That's why I think non-eaten signs is such a great example of what should be a no-brainer for the reasons you've described from a procurement perspective, but very often it isn't. And so I'm interested to get into that discussion a little bit later on to find out, what are some of those barriers and what we can do to remove them. But Beth, from your perspective, why is it important that social enterprises thrive and prosper?
Well, I think because social enterprises are essentially doing what, in theory, all businesses should do, and really, sometimes at Supply Change we talk about really our mission being that the word social enterprise in the future won't even exist because it will just be the way that all businesses operate in society. And so social enterprises now are pioneers. They are operating and doing business in a way that others aren't, and they are forging that path. And that's why it's so difficult, because it is a new path and society isn't set up to make them prosper. So it's important to support these, early innovators and these first movers, so that we create the systems to make it easier for everybody to operate as a social enterprise.
No, agreed. And, Peter, anything to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I just probably sitting too near the speaker, judging by that feedback. I think you're right. I think these models they're not about a moral imperative to do more in society. It's about how we create economies that are ultimately efficient in terms of what they do with the wealth that they generate, efficient in terms of the people that they employ, efficient in terms of the resources they use. And I don't believe that every business will become a social enterprise in my lifetime, but I believe the market conditions will move businesses much closer towards what we consider social enterprises to look like and the characteristics they have. So this market is definitely moving. Investment funds are moving. Employees are looking much more for purposeful businesses to spend their time and efforts and energy and careers with. So the whole market is shifting in this way, and social enterprises are the proof of concept that you can do business in a responsible way, you can still be profitable, and you can do the right thing.
No, thank you. And it's interesting, we had this recent public procurement notification, this PPN 0620 for those of you who are interested in a fantastic bedtime read. But it's actually changed the game from a public procurement perspective, because now there's a minimum 10% weighting on all public procurement around social value, which means more than ever before, large corporate organisations, particularly those trying to supply into the public sector, are interested in trying to deliver those social outcomes and moving much, much closer to something I recognise as being mission-led organisations.
And can I just add, I mean, what's really significant is when we got the Social Value Act entered onto statute, the only duty was for procurement officers to consider social value. And it's very easy to consider social value and go, yeah, thought about that, didn't apply, didn't use it. But now, actually, the real shift is not only the 10%, but the duty to account for social value. And that's turned this into an industry and a whole new marketplace where people, like Social Value Portal and many others can prosper in this new market where social value is a currency that is becoming much more meaningful, much more sophisticated, and much more important to the way we make our procurement decisions.
It is. There are some challenges, though, to social enterprises to engage in that process. And I think one of those challenges is just ensuring you know how to communicate in that language. So clearly what social enterprises do is create social impact, but it's got to be communicated and translated in a way that works within the procurement laws. And so that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing, is helping social enterprises, micro businesses, voluntary organisations to change the way that they talk about what they do so that they can engage in that procurement process. And there's still a lot of work to be done there, because I know many feel left out of the process because they don't quite understand it. They feel penalised. And the problem is that buyers don't want to pay for what you would do anyway. They want to pay for what they can get in addition to what they're going to buy. And so it's just about understanding that, and we spend a lot of time and can spend more time with social enterprises to work that out and to make themselves competitive in that kind of environment.
So I want to talk about monetisation for a moment, because there's in that kind of public procurement landscape that you described in terms of the language of social value, there is this whole rush to kind of calculate and put a value on the outcomes that we deliver. But I personally feel a kind of a tension between the outcomes and the impact on people and communities and the environment and society more broadly, versus this monetized value and the rush to get the biggest number. Is there the potential that we'll miss the point or not focus on the right things through monetization? I suspect Social Value Portal will say no, but what?
I mean, of course there is. when you measure the impact that you're making, we use a framework which does put a pounds and pence value on an activity. And so at times it can be perceived that that's the biggest and most important factor, how much social value in pounds and pence is being offered. And we're working with procurers to understand that's not the most important thing. And that's a constant challenge. The reason we monetize social value is because it's quite easy to understand where you're getting most value in a financial term. And if all of us here in the social space find it quite hard to work out what activity might generate more value than another, imagine if you're a procurement professional, you've got hundreds of procurements to evaluate and work out, it's even harder. So we do work with them to prioritise impact that is required locally. And that might not be a big number. It actually might be some activities with a less value, but are more meaningful to the communities that they're serving. It's going to be a process. But as you know, PPNO 620 for central government does not consider the quantitative value through evaluation.
I did know that. I know the look on my face made you think I did know that. But Beth, sorry, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just, I personally think that qualitative measures when you're dealing with social enterprises impact need to be considered first and foremost, because I worry that a large main contractor can respond to a social value requirement in a bid and talk about how many apprenticeships they're going to create, and I'm sure they will be very valuable apprenticeships, but they will be able to offer simply more apprenticeships than a smaller social enterprise, and therefore they may look better on that response than that social enterprise. But the work that that social enterprise is putting into those apprentices, the time and support and often rehabilitation that they might be giving them, is not put across in that number. And I personally feel that that is something that is still a barrier to social enterprises and hasn't entirely been solved yet by the PPN 620.
Thank you. Peter, is there something about accountability as well? Because I know lots of rigour in the procurement process, but I don't always see the same rigour in the contract management phase. And so people make huge, great big promises about the things they're going to deliver and aren't always held accountable. Is there more that needs to happen in that space?
Yeah, look, it's twofold. I mean, one of the big challenges, particularly for local government, which is where vast amounts of public money is spent through rather than central government, is that local government themselves have been hollowed out in terms of resource over the last 10 years or so, and simply don't have the capacity internally to contract manage. So the point you make is a very good one. What I would say is this is an evolution. It took 200 years for accountants to agree international financial standards upon which we now all report financially. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take 200 years for social value, I hope. I don't think we've got that long. But this is an evolutionary process. The other thing that I would be careful of is trying to kind of reduce everything to pounds and pence and shillings or whatever. Because actually what we're talking about in social value is something much more important. How can you put a price really on the quality of care of an elderly person or the protection of a child that's vulnerable? How can you put a price on kind of the billions of acres of rainforests or wetlands? I mean, it's very, very difficult. We've tried. I mean, God knows we've tried. So I think, look, it's okay in some regards. It's illustrative. It helps to make some comparisons. But this is an evolution. And what I'm really encouraged by, obviously, we've been working with Cabinet Office to improve the social value procurement notices and the way that's used. We've also been working with Labour for what a future government may do there. And Angela Rayner made a very, very important speech at Labour Party conference this week to say, actually, I want to move social value away from contract by contract to actually assessing the whole value a company makes. So not just on a single contract, but where do they pay their tax? Yeah. Where are they registered? What's the kind of inequality ratios between the boardroom pay and the average worker pay? I mean, there's a whole range, and I'm not saying those are necessarily the right ones, but that's where kind of Labour are going. And so this is an evolving landscape, and I think there's every reason for private businesses in the room to get ahead of the curve, because right around the world we're seeing these trends really accelerate. And so whatever we call it, whether we call it public benefit, social value, this is an agenda that is here to stay and is only going to increase in value and consideration in procurement, but also in the minds of consumers and future workforces too.
Thank you. I'm going to come to the audience in a second to kind of get your thoughts and any question in particular. Kind of interested in what are some of the challenges that you're facing as either procuring from social enterprises and or being a social enterprise and the challenges you face as an organisation more generally, and also I suppose something about the experience that you have of working in a social enterprise. But my final question before we move to the audience questions is the importance of co-creating solutions with local communities and how organisations can better go about that.
I think there's a responsibility here for main contractors actually in a lot of the issues that I find SEs have is in not being able to supply orders, not having the scale, not being able to commit to a contract because they just don't have experience in delivering it. Not what, but at the size is required. And I think if main contractors can invest more and prepare social enterprises more and award them longer term contracts, they'll be perfectly capable to do it once they've got the time to prepare. And I think that is a very big, it's a really big opportunity. It works for main contractors because you're constantly requiring social enterprises in your supply chain, but it gives social enterprises an opportunity to meet these needs as well. So, I mean, I don't know any of you who went to the Commonwealth Games, but it's the biggest thing that ever happened to Birmingham, my hometown. And one of the big issues with the Games was they had a commitment to deliver social value through social enterprises, but half of them were not ready to accept the orders or to deliver against the services. Not because they weren't capable, but because they had no preparation and no experience. And that's a real sore point for me because it's local work that could have gone to local people and that could have created local spend. And that happened not far away from here and not long ago. And there's absolutely, weights are here. And I know that you did some great work on the aquatic centre in Smethwick. Lend-Lease, who aren't here, had a massive obligation to spend 10% with social enterprises. They couldn't find them. And so there is a huge responsibility of main contractors to work with social enterprises to build up their network, to prepare them to accept orders so that when you're bidding, that's the last point in which the SE wants to know. They want to know before it's planned so that they can get ready.
And need some investment at that point.
Yeah. Sure, and you're not looking for charity, you're looking for a commitment so that you can prepare to do that. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's certainly a big consideration for me.
No, it certainly created a few questions for a little bit later on in some of those sessions as well. So thank you. Beth, any thoughts on
I completely agree and echo all of those sentiments. I think early engagement is so important. And actually, this is going to sound like I'm plugging us, and I kind of am, but working with intermediaries who can help to connect you to social enterprises or to local communities, it saves you time and resource, but it also gives you access to that expertise and direct access to social enterprises that maybe you don't have the time to consider, and that's why you're kind of rushing to complete these contracts and award these tenders. So speak to local BCSE groups, use organisations like Social Enterprise UK and Supply Change, and do your research. Think about what are the categories of spend you're going to be using on this contract in that area. Are there potential contracts that you can switch to a social enterprise supplier? Use an intermediary to research and go and find those suppliers and start speaking to them as early as possible and to understand what their needs are, what they would need to be able to fulfill the contract. If they can't deliver a contract directly, can they engage with your tier 2 suppliers? It needs to happen way ahead of the kind of contract award stage. So early engagement is key, and using intermediaries as well.
I'll try and keep it brief. Two points I think that haven't been made. One, not all social enterprises are small businesses, so we need to just get away from that stereotype, because I think it can harm the sector. My largest member is turning over £60 billion this year, and I'm very proud of that, and that's the cooperative group. I also have Nationwide Building Society in my community. I also have a tech company that you may see on your mobile phone, Signal, which is a competitor to WhatsApp. Sesame Street, yes, Sesame Street is only Sesame Street because it's a social enterprise. So not assume too much that these are all micro businesses. But yes, there are, and you're right. The other point that I would make is that not all public sector contracts are right for all social enterprises. And I think there's a bit of a risk that we encourage social enterprises that are too small or unready to kind of see milk and honey, a land of milk and honey in these big procurement opportunities. And actually we need to be honest about the realities of public procurement. It is no walk in the park. It is frustrating. It's going to take twice as long as you ever imagined. You're going to have to invest money, probably in the tendering process and the bidding process.
You won't get paid.
You won't get paid for months and months and months. You know, it is a challenge, and I think you just have to be fully aware of both the pros and cons of entering into these arrangements and going with your eyes wide open. But I completely agree with what the other panelists have said. You know, there is more that can be done from both the social enterprise side, from the intermediary side. Contracts can be broken down. It's not only social enterprises that miss out actually on these opportunities. If you look at where public money goes, £300 billion of our taxpayers' money, you would be appalled at actually how few suppliers actually benefit from that large slug of money. If we're going to really level up this country and bring back some hope and opportunity into our towns and cities, or our regional towns and cities, we need to break down contract sizes, not only so social enterprises benefit, but so also small businesses and micro businesses also get, you know, that opportunity too. And that's about bringing money back from, you know, all of the ridiculous obscene wealth in London, which I'm obviously representing today, down into the regions and towns and the cities, making sure that the wealth isn't skewed towards the southeast and London. And so this is an opportunity about how we rebalance our whole economy, not just about how we create opportunities for social enterprises and supply chains.
Thank you. Friends, colleagues, we've got a couple of questions already. I think Michelle's got the roving mic. We've got a question from a friend at the front and at the back as well.
Hello, I'm Birgit Kehrer. I run Change Kitchen. You're going to eat our food later, hopefully. My question is just connected to the two questions ago, or comment to the procurement. I think one of the things we still are a smaller social enterprises, and probably others could do with help with, is some protection to being bid candy. And I don't know what that is, but I think I'm just putting it out there. I think if we're good, I've had, so what that means is people writing us into a contract to look good, to get a contract, and then say, nah, actually we're not going to do it now. I've been on the receiving end on both, so we've definitely had that, people writing us in and then just forgetting about it conveniently after they got the contract. I've also have a really good example from the Commonwealth Games actually. GL Events, who were the provider of all the temporary seating and other stuff, they wrote us and our joint venture partner Jericho into and did come back with the goods. In fact, they have promised, I'm going to say it here loud and hopefully we'll remind them, they want to keep engaged with us. They like what we're doing and they want to still keep on helping us through different things and want to use us and introduce us to other partners, and they have done that already. So I've seen both. In that case, I didn't need a protection. They stuck to it and they did exactly that. Talked to us much before, committed to certain amounts of money, and then stuck with it and actually over-delivered, which is great. But yeah, bid candy, some protection. I know that's not a magic thing, but it's important to think about.
Bid candy, who it is?
I think it comes down to contract management again. And I know Birmingham City Council well, I know West Midlands Combined Authority well, I know Jericho well. And the only way to stop that is to make a commitment throughout procurement, for it to be evaluated and for it to almost be immortalised in the contract, and for the contract managers to pick it up and to make sure that the supplier is adhering to it. That's really the only way. Birmingham are incredibly under-resourced. They've got a fantastic social value programme. They've got the social value charter. They've got some excellent guys there working it through. They've also launched a new project platform as well. I can't quite remember what it's called now, but it works really well for the city. But I also know of some vendors who know that contract managers in Birmingham are under-resourced. And so it's a real challenge to ensure that commitments are being maintained.
It's this accountability thing again, isn't it? I mean, it's so frustrating because when you've explained the great kind of program up front to procure a service, and no effort whatsoever, or very little or less effort put in to ensure that the commitments that were made up front are actually delivered in contract. I know something as main contractors, it's something that we're working kind of very hard to do, to get those commitments from our supply chain and then hold them accountable through those contractual conditions. It's just, what is the point of going to all that effort in the procurement stage if actually it doesn't follow through it's so frustrating. I know that doesn't help,
I honestly think disclosure has got to be demanded and almost enforced. If it was required that they had to publish who they worked with, what social value was committed, then they would do it. And now some people won't like that. I'm sure the procurers won't like that. But I think disclosure is the only way to guarantee it's going to be visible.
I completely echo that, and even people like the National Audit Office, who are kind of the government's accountants, really, have also called, and the government's chief procurement officer has called for open book accounting across all public sector contracts. That drives us into a much greater spirit of partnership working, rather than this ongoing kind of transactional relationship that we're encouraged to have. I think we all want to see our country prosper. We want to see young people with assured futures. There shouldn't be this kind of delineation, actually, that we see. And we need much longer term relationships. We need a much longer term horizon beyond a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract. We need to be building for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And we need to have a really bold ambition for what we can collectively deliver for this country over that sort of period. And I completely agree that, we need much greater transparency across government, across business, across every part of society, actually.
Thank you. Michelle, we've got another question at the back there. Lee and Nathan, beware, I'm lacking volunteers, and so we'll be coming to my victims ever so shortly. Sorry, colleague.
Yeah, there's Charlie Green from Social Value Manager from Milestone Infrastructure. I've got 2 questions, I'm going to wrap them up in one. Do you think social enterprises should have a certain level of tax break associated to their work? And do you think social enterprises should receive preferable rates on their services?
Yes. Were you at the Social Value Portal conference in London
I was.
a couple of months ago?
Yeah.
And I raised exactly this point on the day, and then asked Guy point blank, will you discount your services at Social Value Portal for social enterprises?
Yes, because we do.
Excellent. Good answer. Right answer.
Might be a good time to also say we will also be, for the last few months of this year, we will be offering social enterprises complimentary memberships. So there are 4 memberships that will be fee waived for 4 social enterprises. So the application will open next week, and I'll make sure that Michelle knows and that all of you are invited to apply.
But in answer to the question, generally, should they have preferential terms?
Yes.
Potentially the easiest question of the day.
No, actually, although I'm Chief Executive Social Enterprise UK, and you would think that I would say, yes, of course, social enterprises should have all these breaks, I'm just going to put a word of caution out there. What we've seen in the charity sector who do benefit from charitable tax breaks is a lot of businesses, private businesses, adopting that structure in order to benefit from them. So who knew that IKEA was a charity, or Fortnum & Mason's was a charity, or half the private schools in this country are charities, right? So, let's be cautious about applying tax breaks to structures. What we want to drive, I think, is a playing field which is actually tilted towards responsible, good businesses that are good for this country and good for its society. And they can come in all shapes and sizes, and I recognise that. A word of caution, right? So, Serco, are they here today? All good. No, let me just tell you, because in my neighbourhood, this has come up, right? So they won a massive contract, actually, to do a lot of outsourcing of library services. And actually what they did was start setting up social enterprises that they actually controlled and owned. And they were doing what Starbucks does, which is transfer pricing. They were claiming not to make any profit, so that didn't have to be redistributed back into the local community or go to the workforce or anyone else. But they were paying high license fee rates back to the mothership, which is exactly how Starbucks operate their global model. They refuse to declare profits in countries like this, and they take all their profits back to low tax environments like Luxembourg or Dublin. And that's a standard practice in global business. But we're actually seeing that emerge more and more frequently, even with the outsourcers in this country. So we just have to be a bit cautious about, making sure that what we're trying to do is achieve the right outcomes for our country and our society, because what you can do is, turn, for every consequence, there's another consequence over here, or for every action, there's another consequence over there. So just be a little bit cautious. I would love to see positive impacts, contributions to our community, to our society, and our planet be tax advantaged, 100%.
Yes, I do think social enterprises should receive preferred rates. I agree that tax breaks would need to be done in a way that was organisations were, put under due diligence, and there was rigorous, accountability on those. But I think you do need to give social enterprises a bit of a head start in situations where they're not starting from the same playing field as other commercial businesses. I think that social enterprises should be viewed as commercial, profitable businesses, and shouldn't, in some ways, be viewed as I think sometimes when you view them too much as like charities, that it can, lead to negative perceptions of them. But there are cases where certain discounts or, just a head start makes a huge difference. So things like, for example, many contractors require their suppliers to have gold construction line membership. And that used to be like a big barrier for some social enterprises, because the construction line membership was quite a cost for some social enterprises. And now Construction Line, who we have a partnership with, are offering their membership for free to social enterprises. And that's quite a small thing really, but actually massive in terms of reducing quite a common barrier to getting onto the supply chains of some main contractors, and probably not something that was too hard for Construction Line to do. So I think in cases like that, it does make sense to give social enterprises, more of a preferred rate.
I will just add to that though, I think just going back to the likes of Nationwide and the Co-op, they can totally withstand being scrutinised and the demands of a non-social enterprise. And I think we don't want to paint the picture that compromises need to be made. So I think there's a balance really in ensuring that a social enterprise should be a sustainable, healthy, profitable business, and there should be expectations on them that are the same as expectations on any other private company. But if they are generating a significant amount of social value, having a massive amount of impact, that should be balanced with the concessions.
I mean, I completely agree. I think, and most social enterprises, if I'm honest, and any business can decide to distribute profit before it declares it. So if it can see profits surging, you can always, and everyone does, buy the boss a new company car, take a team trip to Barcelona or whatever. There's ways in which businesses do manage their profitability and thereby manage the level of tax they pay. I think what we need to see is a wholesale reform of all rates and business taxes in this country. Business rates do not work, Amazon pay nothing, your local high street independent butcher is paying £10,000, £15,000 a year. What we have is a chronic failure in our, kind of 19th century tax system, which has not been reformed. And actually, if we're going to reform tax, let's do the whole bleeding thing, not just give social enterprises a discount, because we are that urgent in need of whole-scale economic, political and social reform.
I'm trying to avoid making any parallels or making mention to Kwasi Kwarteng's tax reforms recently made. I'm not sure they quite address some of the challenges we've got here today. We've got a few more questions in the audience, just by way of comment. I said earlier on we've got a stellar panel for you, and I just want to acknowledge kind of the quality of the response and the insight that we've got from the panel around that question, which seemed like a straightforward one, but as ever, there's always devil in the detail. We've got a question at the back. Friend Richard DeVille.
Yeah, Richard Balfour Beatty. Thanks, Aaron. I was just going to say.
Sorry, I didn't hear where you said you were from.
Balfour Beatty, that wonderful place.
I don't think it's material.
All I'm saying is you abandoned us. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. But so basically, one of the things that we have problems is around recognition of the value that you add within our, beyond just a name of saying we will use a social enterprise. The value that you add, I don't think, is truly reflected back in measures that we can put back in the pound, shillings, and pence. And also the thing we talked about, secondary spend. That's something that we consciously do with some of our suppliers. We'll say, can you go and use a social enterprise because it's tricky for us to use them, and again, that at the moment gets no recognition. We can't get that kind of. So, is there a way around this that we can work out, getting the recognition of the actual impacts that social enterprises bring to the business?
Peter.
I think we're on the cusp of some incredible technological breakthroughs that are really going to advance that. I think, like within blockchain technology, you've got an opportunity, if it's developed in the right way and owned in the right way, to be able to look at a spend and actually explore every part of the supply chain and see where financial value has been extracted, where profitability has been extracted. So I think technology is going to enable us to bring transparency in a whole new way. And actually, that should be part of the system and process. If we're going to really drive kind of efficiency and productivity gains, that's the sort of thing we need to do. We need to understand what's happening, where are the leaks, and where are the additional benefits through what are increasingly complex, increasingly international supply chains. And that will really ensure that we can assess, are we creating fair value? Is the balance right? And that's always going to be a subjective conversation, and that's why these guys on my left are always going to be in business. I've got no doubt. They're in a good market that's going to grow and grow and grow. But that's my great hope, that we are on the verge of some significant breakthroughs which will help bring the transparency to those complex supply chains, and we'll be able to assess exactly who's taking value and at what point and where is that value going.
Any perspective from Social Value Portal? How do we capture that tier 2 contribution?
I despair, actually. I've spent a long time in ethical supply chains and ethical sourcing, and we struggle to work out where slave labour is. Now, that is a very big issue for a lot of organisations. What we're talking about here is nowhere near as negative. It's a positive thing that we're talking about, but I think technology is halfway there. I mean, JP Asset Morgan were talking about it. They're looking at blockchain and using it to understand where investments go, but I just don't think it's going to happen quickly enough, and I don't think it's going to get down to tier 2 or tier 3 as soon as we want it to. Maybe tier 1 for a certain portion of spend if we're lucky, hopefully, but I think it's not going to solve the problem for the long tail spend. I think that needs to come through diligent processes managed by people in a responsible way.
For me, there's definitely something about incentivising the right behaviour as well, because I know there's a number of organisations who use non-eating signs through other suppliers, and if that can't be recognised, then I fear that, modern slavery is a fantastically complicated problem to solve. What we're talking about here is capturing tier 2 spend with an organisation where there is relative transparency, and so Sorry.
No, I just think that was such a big problem that's still not solved. To consider we'd be trying to do the same thing with our problems, which are nowhere near as negative, I think is a little bit. I think it's going to be a much bigger challenge.
Beth, any thoughts?
I think it's not going to solve the problem as a whole, but greater education at every level of the supply chain. I mean, it's great, obviously, that organisations like Morgan Stanley and Waits have such an awareness of social procurement and social enterprise, but if it's not going all the way down to tier 2, tier 3, then that is where you're going to get those discrepancies or lack of communication about what's happening. And if there isn't an incentive either, then of course that's not going to happen. So there has to be activity to educate your direct stakeholders, but also those in your supply chain as well.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions there. So somebody at the background who are in the back who I don't recognise, and
Thank you.
we're not interested in what company he works for. And then a friend and colleague from Waits.
Joe Oldham, Balfour BT. So I think that issue we were just discussing does need to be resolved. It's a really big one for us, and we do need to do it. It kind of brings me on to my question, which was, how well do you all work together to ensure that we as kind of main contractors can get access to social enterprises? And then secondary question, what can we learn from that as main contractors? How can we work more together to overcome some of the barriers that you've spoken about?
Peter, I definitely recognise his challenge as well. There is, where do I go and find a list of social enterprises? There are many lists. There are lists of lists. But sorry, to Peter, to Joe's question.
It's a really good question, and it is data is always a tricky issue. And unlike charities, for example, which have a single legal structure and a charity commission where you can go and interrogate all sorts of data, social enterprises do come in different legal forms, and we are encouraging government. And in fact, we're just in a tendering process with government to help them not only spend more money as government departments with social enterprises, but actually capture the data and the methodologies that will help them improve their own reporting. There's a kind of an ever-growing challenge. I mean, we've done a lot of work around data. I've got probably the largest network of social enterprises in the world. And in the UK, there's meant to be 100,000 social enterprises. The government have just said 120,000, and I've got like nearly 4,000 members, which is only 4%. So look, and that's not a terrible number, by the way. That's equivalent to what the IOD or the FSB or the CPI get. So it is really difficult. First of all, we need social enterprises to come out and say we're a social enterprise, and actually perhaps voluntarily put themselves on a social enterprise register, perhaps. But look, these are difficult and tricky things, and big suppliers trying to find small suppliers in a community have some of the same challenges, right? There's this kind of scale mismatch, and what we need, I think, in this country is to see social enterprises like Nuneaton Scales get to bigger scale, but also continue to populate that world of new startups, new innovators. And this country hasn't done such a great job, really, in terms of plurality of our economy. We have a great army of small businesses. We have some very, very impressive global businesses, but we do have that kind of missing middle of small or medium-sized regional businesses that are ready to scale. And that's a problem with our kind of economic model that they don't have across the channel in places like Germany. So we have to learn, we have to understand where the gaps are in our economy and put the finance in place and the opportunities in place to allow that scaling to take place. And then I think you will get the visibility.
Thank you. Colleagues, we're rapidly approaching the break, and we've got one more question I wanted to squeeze in before we do. Sorry, colleague.
Hi, it's David from Waits. It's not really a question, it's just picking up on what Leyoh said about effectively supply chain mapping. I just want to give you a bit of confidence. We've done a whole exercise based around modern slavery on mapping our supply chain. It's an absolute nightmare. Getting down to tier 1s, tier 2s and tier 3s, and the whole thing falls apart, as you're aware, because you've done it. The reality around this is, though, they're waking up to it, so our top supply chains understand there's a requirement for it. Sustainability will drive it. So the carbon equal pounds, that will drive this, and then they're waking up to this. Science-based targets will drive it. So I don't think we're as far away as we think we are. And when they wake up and understand that all the main contractors, customers need this as a measure, they'll open the doors. They don't want to give away the crown jewels. They haven't got the data to do it properly, but they're waking up to it. So I don't think it's as far away as we think it is, but it's exceedingly difficult now. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, can I just come in? I think you're 100% right, and I think sometimes we can get caught up in the complexity unnecessarily so. I've been working on this issue, or thinking about this issue, for a long time, right? And I'm working with Donor Economics Action Lab and Oxfam, actually, who have some shared interest, actually, in trying to assess the impact of a company on multiple determinants of quality of life and environmental impact. And what we've got it down to is we believe that inequality drives an awful lot of social destructive behaviours. And actually, what is the impact of a company on inequality, on wealth inequality within a particular location? And actually, just by following the money and seeing where money goes to, you can get a really good sense of whether a company's activity is driving inequality or helping to reduce it. And that isn't a bad proxy on which to determine whether, because so many issues are driven by wealth inequality. Environmental destruction is driven partly by wealth inequality. Education, aspiration, hope, health. So many of these things are driven actually by wealth and income inequality that it's not a bad proxy to start with. So I think there is new thinking emerging, and I do think you're right, it's not as far away as we might fear.
Colleagues, we've got 28 seconds left, and there's only,
I got 28 seconds to go.
there's only one person we can give the final word to, and that's Michelle.
Thank you very much, and I cannot thank you enough that are on stage for coming along today, because have we had an event before where we have got this calibre of people on stage together? No, I can't think of one that I've been to, so massive thank you to that. The question I have is not an easy answer, I don't think. We started trading in 1982. We had a very clear purpose, we had a very clear mission. We did not hear the term social enterprise until 2018. So whilst we're sat here talking about these corporations, the tier ones, the tier twos, the tier threes, how do we educate people earlier so that those companies that are out there now that have never heard the term social enterprise but actually are one can join this movement and can have the support from us, from yourselves and everybody else, because there will be ones out there that are doing business for good because they feel it's the right thing to do but are not part of this SE movement. How can we help them?
Just for context, before you answer that, and this may be a gap in my knowledge, but I'm not aware of a place where a social enterprise can register themselves without the barrier of cost. And
You can register for free on supply chain as a social enterprise.
great plug. So I set it up.
Yeah, for small businesses, I mean, we obviously are a social enterprise ourselves, and it's counterintuitive for us to just do loads of free stuff that doesn't sustain itself. But if you're a small social enterprise with turnover less than 100 grand, it's free. We do ask a small contribution for bigger social enterprises. We are addressing some of these big issues. Like social enterprise, we of course, it's in our interest to map public recognition of it. Google Analytics, there is data and there is an emergence of not just a UK movement, but a global movement. I've been fortunate enough to work in Kenya with Social Enterprise Kenya, Social Enterprise Ethiopia. I've launched Social Enterprise Lebanon. I've worked in India, Pakistan. I've worked in Iran. This is a global movement, and I think the last 10 years in the UK haven't been the most fertile environment in which social enterprises have emerged. But as a global movement, there's a lot of hope to be had.
Beth, how can we do more? How can we get more to join the movement?
I do think there needs to be greater recognition of social enterprises by government. Obviously, we've seen huge steps in the right direction in the last even 2 years, although that may be going the other way now. But yes, I mean, we still sit in this weird blurred line between a charity and a business, and it means that we're not recognised in the same way as other businesses, and that needs to change. But I agree with Peter. I do think it is a slow process, but I think even in the 4 years that I've been doing supply chain, I've seen such a greater amount of interest in what we're doing from businesses across a range of different sectors. So I think we as intermediaries and corporates need to leverage our networks and shout about them more to just make them more part of the public consciousness.
And can I just add, because we are Social Enterprise UK, it's not the same in every part of the UK. So Scotland is flying at the moment. They've had 12, 15 years of structural and financial support for their sector. They are seen as part of the business community, and they are getting kind of preferential access to contracts. It's not just about levelling the playing field, it's about tilting it for impact businesses. So, and Wales too, actually. I have to say, England has kind of fallen back a bit. We used to be, according to the Social Enterprise World Forum, the most benign country in the world to start a social enterprise. I think we're now number 14 in the world ranking, so we've got to reclaim our place.
Thank you. Colleagues, we've got a break approach, and I think we've got teas, coffees, juices, maybe a few snacks and nibbles, that sort of thing.